Kim Jack had never been one to expect much from life. After all, she spent her days balancing plates at a small, bustling diner, always on her feet, always rushing. The job was grueling, and there was no time for herself, not really. But there was one thing Kim always made time for, something no one knew about, something that kept her going when everything else seemed to fall apart. Every day, during her brief break between the lunch and dinner rush, Kim would sneak out the back door with a takeout container hidden in her backpack. She wasn't going to lunch herself. No, she was going to see him. The homeless man who sat on the sidewalk near her workplace, always in the same spot, as if he had a secret connection to the street, to the world around him. She'd seen him there day after day, sitting still, his eyes lost in some faraway thought, while people hurried past him without a second glance. But Kim never passed him by. Not anymore. She had noticed something about James from the first day she'd seen him, a quiet dignity, a calm that didn't seem to belong to someone living on the streets. He never asked for anything. Not even a smile, but when Kim took the time to talk to him, he responded with a grace that was almost surreal for someone in his position. James's smile was a rarity, but when it appeared, it lit up his face like a quiet sunrise, and it always did something to Kim's heart. There was something about him that made her feel important. Like she mattered. It wasn't like Dylan, her ex-fiancé, who made her feel invisible, unworthy of anything more than a passing glance. So, Kim would bring him food. A simple gesture, maybe, but it was the only way she knew how to show someone kindness in a world that so often overlooked the smallest acts of humanity. "Grilled chicken today, with rice and broccoli," Kim said, squatting down beside James, offering him the warm meal. She gave him a small, almost hesitant smile, unsure if he'd even accept it. James lifted his eyes, and a tiny smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Definitely better than yesterday. That rice tasted like cement. Kim laughed softly, a sound that seemed too loud against the hum of the busy street around them. "At least it's hot." James nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "It's not just about the food, you know," he said, taking the meal from her with a careful, deliberate motion. "It's about the kindness. People don't give that away much anymore." Kim swallowed, suddenly feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't used to hearing such things, especially not from someone like him. A homeless man, one who had every right to be bitter or angry at the world for treating him like a nobody. "How was it in there today?" he asked between bites of food, his tone light, as if it was the most normal question in the world. Kim rolled her eyes, the irritation from the lunch rush still fresh in her mind. "Oh, the usual. A customer tried to convince me that they were allergic to pepper, so they could get a free dessert. I almost threw a pudding at their forehead." James chuckled, the sound deep and warm, a sound Kim hadn't heard in a long time. It was the kind of laugh that made her feel like everything might just be okay, if only for a moment. But that moment was shattered in an instant. Footsteps. Fast and hurried. Kim's heart skipped a beat as she instinctively turned to look. Across the street, there was Dylan, her fiancé, at least, he had been her fiancé. Now, he was with another woman, a blonde who was clinging to him like she had every right to be there. Dylan's arm was wrapped around her waist, and as if to drive the knife deeper, he kissed her. Kim's stomach twisted, and before she could stop herself, she was on her feet, charging across the street like a storm about to explode. She had to confront him. She had to know what had happened, why he had done this to her. "Dylan," she shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. The couple stopped, and Dylan looked at her, his expression a mix of surprise and annoyance, like she was some inconvenient problem he had forgotten to deal with. His new woman froze, glancing between them, her eyes wide with confusion. "Kim, not now. Not now." Dylan's voice was sharp, dismissive. Kim couldn't believe it. "You're cheating on me in the middle of the street, and you're asking me not to make a scene?" Her words came out like daggers. The blonde woman took a step back, her eyes wide, unsure of what to do. But Dylan? He laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. You're overreacting, Kim. Things between us have been falling apart for months. You just didn't want to see it. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. 3 years. 3 years they'd been together. 3 years of promises, of dreams, of a future they'd planned together. And now he was telling her it had all been a lie. 3 years, Dylan, Kim's voice trembled with the weight of her disbelief. 3 years together. You promised we'd get married, that you were just waiting on a promotion, that you'd introduce me to your parents. Why? Why would you do this to me? Dylan's eyes hardened, and he sneered at her, as if she were some pathetic, misguided fool. Because I've grown, Kim. And you? He looked her up and down, a sneer curling his lips. You're still in the same place. You're just a waitress. I have ambition, Kim. I'm going somewhere. And honestly, do you really think my family would accept someone like you? Kim's breath caught in her throat. His words were like ice, sinking into her skin, freezing her from the inside out. She felt her chest tighten, her hands shaking. But she refused to cry. Not here. Not now. Suddenly, a voice broke through the cold air. Deep. Firm. Calm. Hey, James's voice was steady, unwavering. He had stepped forward, his posture strong, like someone who wasn't afraid of anything. Dylan turned to him, clearly annoyed. And who are you? He scoffed, looking James up and down. Her janitor? No, James said, his voice low and clear. I'm a friend. Dylan chuckled, as if the idea of someone like James standing up to him was laughable. Well, look at that. Even your homeless friend decided to butt in. You should leave before you say more than your conscience can handle. James didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He simply met Dylan's eyes, unblinking. You've said enough, man. Dylan rolled his eyes, clearly done with this encounter. Whatever, he muttered, then shot Kim one last look, full of arrogance and contempt. He turned, walking away with the blonde woman without saying another word. Kim stood there, frozen in place. Her mind was still trying to process what had just happened. She was still trying to wrap her head around the fact that Dylan, the man she had planned her life with, had just completely shattered everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her mother. Sweetheart, is everything all set for the weekend? Your grandma's so excited to see you, especially to meet your fiancé. You know how she is. All she wants is to see you married before anything happens. Kim's heart sank. She could already hear her mother's voice, filled with that familiar sense of expectation. Kim had promised her grandmother she'd be married before her birthday. That was this Sunday. Yeah, Mom. Everything's fine. He's coming with me. Of course. We're doing great. Her voice was weak, barely holding it together. The call ended, but the weight of it lingered. She stood there, the world around her blurry, her thoughts spinning in a whirlwind. And then, in the midst of it all, James spoke again. You lied, he said quietly, almost too quietly. Kim blinked, as if waking from a trance. I lied, she echoed, barely above a whisper. James nodded, his eyes steady. Your grandmother wants to see you married. It's her dream. And you promised her you'd be married before her birthday. That's this Sunday. Kim felt her stomach twist. She hadn't even thought about that, not with everything that had just happened. But now, in the silence between them, she realized something. The weight of that promise was suffocating her. James was still watching her, calm as ever. Then, in a voice as steady as the rest of him, he said, "Marry me." Kim stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend what he had just said. "You're kidding, right?" "No," James said firmly. "Marry me. Introduce me to your grandmother. After 3 months, we get a divorce. You keep your promise, and I help you with this." Kim's heart skipped a beat. The idea was insane, ridiculous even. But in a way, it felt like the only way out. Everything in her life had fallen apart, and here was this man, this stranger, offering her a way to fix it. "You're homeless, James," she said, her voice shaky. "Maybe," he said with a small, almost sad smile. "But I'm a homeless man who knows how to be thankful, who respects you. That's already more than your ex ever did." Kim stood frozen. The world felt like it had stopped moving around her. This was crazy. This was wild. But in some strange way, it also felt right. "Are you serious?" she whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from him. "I am," James said quietly. "And before you ask, no, I'm not crazy. Or at least not any crazier than you need me to be right now." Kim could barely breathe. Her mind screamed no, but something else inside her whispered, "Why not?" She swallowed hard, the words catching in her throat. Finally, she managed to say, "Okay. Let's get married." James's eyes widened just a fraction, as if surprised by her answer. And just like that, everything changed. As if it were the most natural thing in the world, the two of them walked hand in hand toward the courthouse. The air was crisp, a slight breeze brushing past them as the afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows on the pavement. Neither of them said much. The entire situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but it wasn't a movie, it was their reality now. Kim's heart beat fast, a mixture of excitement, confusion, and nerves. But James? James was as calm as ever, walking beside her with a sense of ease that left her wondering just what kind of man she had just agreed to marry. "Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments," Kim joked, trying to lighten the tension in the air. "Type fried chicken in the comments. Only the people who made it this far will understand." It was her small attempt to distract herself from the growing weight of what she had just agreed to. James glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. All right," he said, barely showing any reaction to her words, as if such strange requests were something he had grown used to. They both chuckled a little, but it didn't last long. The building loomed ahead, unremarkable and plain, a far cry from the glamorous wedding venues Kim had once dreamt about. But today, this was their reality. A courthouse. A stranger. A promise. Inside the courthouse, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they approached the front desk. The woman behind the counter eyed them both, her gaze flicking from Kim to James and then back again, as if trying to figure out what this mismatched pair was doing in such a mundane setting. "We're here to get married," Kim said with surprising confidence, even though her insides were twisting in knots. The receptionist, seemingly unaffected by their appearance, didn't blink twice before grabbing the necessary forms. "All right," she said, still holding the papers. "We'll need your IDs, and you'll need to fill this out quickly. We still have time today." Kim's hands trembled as she filled out the paperwork, her fingers slick with sweat. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she forced herself to focus. Beside her, James filled out his form with an unsettling precision, his handwriting neat and orderly. Kim couldn't help but notice the contrast. While she felt like a whirlwind of chaos, James seemed like a man who had everything under control, even in this unexpected situation. After a few moments, they handed their papers to the receptionist. A short silence passed before they were called into the judge's office. The old man behind the desk adjusted his thin glasses and looked them over carefully, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly when they landed on James. "Good afternoon," the judge said, his voice gravelly from age. "Let's keep this quick, all right?" He paused, then turned his attention back to James. "Are you sure you want to marry this man, miss?" Kim didn't hesitate. There was no time for hesitation. "Absolutely," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "You don't even know him," the judge pointed out, his tone skeptical. "I know enough," Kim replied, her eyes fixed on James. The moment the words left her lips, she realized they were true. She did know enough. He was the one person in her life who had asked for nothing. And right now, in this crazy moment, that was enough. The judge shrugged, clearly not convinced but too tired to argue. "Well, if you both agree, let's make it official." And just like that, with a few flat, formal words and some exchanged glances filled with doubt and nerves, Kim Jack and James Smith were declared husband and wife. The world seemed to shift beneath Kim's feet as she stood there, still processing everything. Was this really happening? Was she really married? To a man she barely knew? They walked out of the courthouse like two kids who had just pulled off the biggest prank of their lives. Kim was sweating bullets, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and shock. James, however, was far too calm. His demeanor, as always, was relaxed. It was as though he had experienced stranger things in his life than a sudden, spontaneous marriage to a desperate waitress. "So now what?" Kim asked, her voice still shaky from the whirlwind they had just been through. She looked at him, holding up the marriage certificate like a symbol of her own personal madness. "Now you take me to your place. We've got to show up clean and presentable at your grandmother's house this weekend, right?" James said, his voice matter-of-fact, as if this whole situation were just another Tuesday for him. Kim let out a nervous laugh, but it didn't feel funny. She had just married a complete stranger. "Oh my God," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I married a stranger." James shrugged. "I'm a polite stranger, and I know how to do dishes." She shot him a look as he walked beside her, still too calm for her taste. But what else could she do? She had made this choice, and she was in it now. There was no turning back. Later, at her small apartment, Kim was still reeling. She had never imagined her life would take such an unexpected turn. The apartment was modest, a tiny studio with a cramped kitchen and a pull-out couch. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And now, it was where her new life was starting, though she couldn't have predicted the path she was about to take. She threw her bag on the floor and sat down on the couch, burying her face in her hands. "What am I doing with my life?" she muttered to herself, still in disbelief at what had just happened. From the bathroom, she heard the sound of the shower turning on. A few minutes later, James emerged from the bathroom, his body wrapped in a white towel, water still dripping from his hair. Kim's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow," she blurted out before she could stop herself. James raised an eyebrow and looked at her, a little amused. "Is something wrong?" "No," she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "It's just, you don't exactly look malnourished." James let out a small laugh. "I work out when I can. You can stay in shape with pull-up bars in the park and by running after buses." Kim couldn't help but laugh, though she was still taken aback. He didn't just look healthy, he looked impressive. He had the kind of body you saw in cologne commercials, broad and defined, and it wasn't something she had expected from a homeless man. "Put on some clothes," she said, shaking her head, still trying to get her bearings. "We're heading out early tomorrow to visit my grandma. Better get everything ready." The next morning, Kim could barely wrap her mind around what had happened. She was driving her old car through the countryside, heading toward her grandmother's house. James sat beside her, wearing a borrowed dress shirt and pants, clothes Kim's brother had left behind from last Christmas. He looked nothing like the homeless man she had first met, and everything about him was starting to feel more complicated than she ever imagined. "You nervous?" James asked casually, his voice breaking the silence. "Me? Nervous?" Kim's voice shook a little. No, just mildly panicking. It'll all go fine. You have a weird gift for staying calm in completely ridiculous situations. Maybe I've had a lot of practice, James said, glancing at her. Kim looked at him, a thought tugging at her mind. You say that like you've been through worse. I have, he replied, his tone giving nothing away. She wanted to ask more but didn't. Something about his calm demeanor made her realize there was more to him than met the eye. The house came into view soon after, surrounded by beautiful flowers and with smoke curling from the chimney. It was cozy, welcoming, and it looked just like the perfect place to meet the woman who had raised Kim. They parked, and as soon as Kim stepped out of the car, her mom rushed toward her, pulling her into a tight hug. Finally, her mother exclaimed, then turned to James. And this must be James. So nice to meet you, sweetheart. James smiled and greeted her politely. The pleasure's mine. Grandma's excited, her mother continued. She's in her room. Go see her, Kim. Take your husband with you. Kim felt a flutter in her stomach. It was strange to think of James as her husband. It felt even stranger to walk through the house with him by her side, like everything about this moment was unnatural, but it had to happen. As they walked down the hallway, Kim opened the door to her grandmother's room. There, sitting in her favorite armchair wrapped in a floral shawl, was Grandma Margot. Grandma, Kim said warmly, trying to make the moment feel more natural than it really was. I want you to meet someone. Her grandmother studied James intently, her small eyes narrowing. James, she murmured, her voice soft but sharp with recognition. That name sounds familiar. You're not that missing billionaire, are you? James froze. His eyes locked with hers for a brief second, but he didn't say anything. His heart raced, but his face remained impassive. Kim looked between them, unsure how to react. Oh, come on, Mom, she said, trying to dismiss the awkward tension. As if I would marry a billionaire. Her mother laughed, but the old woman didn't seem convinced. Maybe you're right, Margot said, still studying James's face. But those eyes. I remember those eyes. You don't forget eyes like that. Kim took a step forward and gently took her grandmother's hand. Grandma, everything's fine. James is new around here. You must be thinking of someone else. Her grandmother looked at James for a long moment, her gaze intense, before she finally smiled. You're right, dear, she said softly. Age plays tricks on me sometimes. I'm getting too old to trust my own memory. James relaxed subtly, his shoulders lowering slightly. Kim wasn't sure if she could still feel the weight of the situation or if it had already passed. But something inside her told her this story wasn't over yet. You seem like a good man, Margot said with a smile toward Kim. If he takes good care of you, he has my blessing. Kim's heart warmed, but something deep inside her still felt unsettled. He does, Kim replied, almost surprised to realize she meant it. Dinner soon followed, a feast that filled the house with the warm, comforting smells of roast chicken and rice with almonds. As they all gathered around the table, the atmosphere shifted. For the first time that day, Kim began to feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out okay. But deep down, she knew her life was now tied to a man she didn't understand, and James had his own secrets. The unexpected marriage, chapter expansion. As if it were the most natural thing in the world, the two of them walked hand in hand toward the courthouse. The air was crisp, a slight breeze brushing past them as the afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows on the pavement. Neither of them said much. The entire situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but it wasn't a movie, it was their reality now. Kim's heart beat fast, a mixture of excitement, confusion, and nerves. But James? James was as calm as ever, walking beside her with a sense of ease that left her wondering just what kind of man she had just agreed to marry. Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments, Kim joked, trying to lighten the tension in the air. Type fried chicken in the comments. Only the people who made it this far will understand. It was her small attempt to distract herself from the growing weight of what she had just agreed to. James glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. All right, he said, barely showing any reaction to her words, as if such strange requests were something he had grown used to. They both chuckled a little, but it didn't last long. The building loomed ahead, unremarkable and plain, a far cry from the glamorous wedding venues Kim had once dreamt about. But today, this was their reality. A courthouse. A stranger. A promise. Inside the courthouse, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they approached the front desk. The woman behind the counter eyed them both, her gaze flicking from Kim to James and then back again, as if trying to figure out what this mismatched pair was doing in such a mundane setting. "We're here to get married," Kim said with surprising confidence, even though her insides were twisting in knots. The receptionist, seemingly unaffected by their appearance, didn't blink twice before grabbing the necessary forms. "All right," she said, still holding the papers. "We'll need your IDs, and you'll need to fill this out quickly. We still have time today." Kim's hands trembled as she filled out the paperwork, her fingers slick with sweat. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she forced herself to focus. Beside her, James filled out his form with an unsettling precision, his handwriting neat and orderly. Kim couldn't help but notice the contrast. While she felt like a whirlwind of chaos, James seemed like a man who had everything under control, even in this unexpected situation. After a few moments, they handed their papers to the receptionist. A short silence passed before they were called into the judge's office. The old man behind the desk adjusted his thin glasses and looked them over carefully, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly when they landed on James. "Good afternoon," the judge said, his voice gravelly from age. "Let's keep this quick, all right?" He paused, then turned his attention back to James. "Are you sure you want to marry this man, miss?" Kim didn't hesitate. There was no time for hesitation. "Absolutely," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "You don't even know him," the judge pointed out, his tone skeptical. "I know enough," Kim replied, her eyes fixed on James. The moment the words left her lips, she realized they were true. She did know enough. He was the one person in her life who had asked for nothing. And right now, in this crazy moment, that was enough. The judge shrugged, clearly not convinced but too tired to argue. "Well, if you both agree, let's make it official." And just like that, with a few flat, formal words and some exchanged glances filled with doubt and nerves, Kim Jack and James Smith were declared husband and wife. The world seemed to shift beneath Kim's feet as she stood there, still processing everything. Was this really happening? Was she really married? To a man she barely knew? They walked out of the courthouse like two kids who had just pulled off the biggest prank of their lives. Kim was sweating bullets, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and shock. James, however, was far too calm. His demeanor, as always, was relaxed. It was as though he had experienced stranger things in his life than a sudden, spontaneous marriage to a desperate waitress. "So now what?" Kim asked, her voice still shaky from the whirlwind they had just been through. She looked at him, holding up the marriage certificate like a symbol of her own personal madness. "Now you take me to your place. We've got to show up clean and presentable at your grandmother's house this weekend, right?" James said, his voice matter-of-fact, as if this whole situation were just another Tuesday for him. Kim let out a nervous laugh, but it didn't feel funny. She had just married a complete stranger. "Oh my God," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I married a stranger." James shrugged. "I'm a polite stranger, and I know how to do dishes." She shot him a look as he walked beside her, still too calm for her taste. But what else could she do? She had made this choice, and she was in it now. There was no turning back. Later, at her small apartment, Kim was still reeling. She had never imagined her life would take such an unexpected turn. The apartment was modest, a tiny studio with a cramped kitchen and a pull-out couch. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And now, it was where her new life was starting, though she couldn't have predicted the path she was about to take. She threw her bag on the floor and sat down on the couch, burying her face in her hands. "What am I doing with my life?" she muttered to herself, still in disbelief at what had just happened. From the bathroom, she heard the sound of the shower turning on. A few minutes later, James emerged from the bathroom, his body wrapped in a white towel, water still dripping from his hair. Kim's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow," she blurted out before she could stop herself. James raised an eyebrow and looked at her, a little amused. "Is something wrong?" "No," she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "It's just, you don't exactly look malnourished." James let out a small laugh. "I work out when I can. You can stay in shape with pull-up bars in the park and by running after buses." Kim couldn't help but laugh, though she was still taken aback. He didn't just look healthy, he looked impressive. He had the kind of body you saw in cologne commercials, broad and defined, and it wasn't something she had expected from a homeless man. "Put on some clothes," she said, shaking her head, still trying to get her bearings. "We're heading out early tomorrow to visit my grandma. Better get everything ready." The next morning, Kim could barely wrap her mind around what had happened. She was driving her old car through the countryside, heading toward her grandmother's house. James sat beside her, wearing a borrowed dress shirt and pants, clothes Kim's brother had left behind from last Christmas. He looked nothing like the homeless man she had first met, and everything about him was starting to feel more complicated than she ever imagined. "You nervous?" James asked casually, his voice breaking the silence. "Me? Nervous?" Kim's voice shook a little. "No, just mildly panicking. It'll all go fine. You have a weird gift for staying calm in completely ridiculous situations." "Maybe I've had a lot of practice," James said, glancing at her. Kim looked at him, a thought tugging at her mind. "You say that like you've been through worse." "I have," he replied, his tone giving nothing away. She wanted to ask more but didn't. Something about his calm demeanor made her realize there was more to him than met the eye. The house came into view soon after, surrounded by beautiful flowers and with smoke curling from the chimney. It was cozy, welcoming, and it looked just like the perfect place to meet the woman who had raised Kim. They parked, and as soon as Kim stepped out of the car, her mom rushed toward her, pulling her into a tight hug. "Finally," her mother exclaimed, then turned to James. "And this must be James. So nice to meet you, sweetheart." James smiled and greeted her politely. "The pleasure's mine." "Grandma's excited," her mother continued. "She's in her room. Go see her, Kim. Take your husband with you." Kim felt a flutter in her stomach. It was strange to think of James as her husband. It felt even stranger to walk through the house with him by her side, like everything about this moment was unnatural, but it had to happen. As they walked down the hallway, Kim opened the door to her grandmother's room. There, sitting in her favorite armchair wrapped in a floral shawl, was Grandma Margot. "Grandma," Kim said warmly, trying to make the moment feel more natural than it really was. "I want you to meet someone." Her grandmother studied James intently, her small eyes narrowing. "James," she murmured, her voice soft but sharp with recognition. "That name sounds familiar. You're not that missing billionaire, are you?" James froze. His eyes locked with hers for a brief second, but he didn't say anything. His heart raced, but his face remained impassive. Kim looked between them, unsure how to react. "Oh, come on, Mom," she said, trying to dismiss the awkward tension. As if I would marry a billionaire. Her mother laughed, but the old woman didn't seem convinced. Maybe you're right, Margot said, still studying James's face. But those eyes. I remember those eyes. You don't forget eyes like that. Kim took a step forward and gently took her grandmother's hand. Grandma, everything's fine. James is new around here. You must be thinking of someone else. Her grandmother looked at James for a long moment, her gaze intense, before she finally smiled. You're right, dear, she said softly. Age plays tricks on me sometimes. I'm getting too old to trust my own memory. James relaxed subtly, his shoulders lowering slightly. Kim wasn't sure if she could still feel the weight of the situation or if it had already passed. But something inside her told her this story wasn't over yet. You seem like a good man, Margot said with a smile toward Kim. If he takes good care of you, he has my blessing. Kim's heart warmed, but something deep inside her still felt unsettled. He does, Kim replied, almost surprised to realize she meant it. Dinner soon followed, a feast that filled the house with the warm, comforting smells of roast chicken and rice with almonds. As they all gathered around the table, the atmosphere shifted. For the first time that day, Kim began to feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out okay. But deep down, she knew her life was now tied to a man she didn't understand, and James had his own secrets. Kim stood in the doorway of the room, watching her grandmother with a small, almost nervous smile. The old woman was wrapped in a floral shawl, her frail hands resting on the armrests of the chair as she stared off into the distance. Kim's heart skipped a beat. She had waited for this moment, for the right time to introduce James to her family, but now it felt different. Real. More than just a formality. Grandma, Kim said softly, her voice tinged with anticipation. I want you to meet someone. Her grandmother slowly shifted her gaze, her small eyes narrowing as they fixed on James. She studied him for a moment, a look of deep concentration crossing her face, before her lips parted. James, she murmured, as if testing the name. That name sounds familiar. James froze, his entire body tensing as the air seemed to thicken around them. Kim glanced between the two of them, her heart pounding in her chest. Could her grandmother know something? Did she recognize him from somewhere? You're not that missing billionaire, are you? Margot's voice was soft, yet there was an edge of certainty in her tone. The question hit James like a wave crashing against a rock. He stayed silent, his mind racing, and for a moment, Kim's world seemed to slow down. Her stomach twisted, and she shot a quick glance at her mother, who stood nearby with a bemused look. Come on, Mom, Kim laughed nervously, her voice a little too high-pitched. As if I'd marry a billionaire. Her eyes flicked back to James, who remained eerily calm. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He just smiled, but Kim could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. She was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Her mother chimed in, brushing the comment aside with a quick, dismissive wave. You must be confusing him with someone else, she said kindly, but Kim saw the flicker of doubt in her mother's eyes. James kept his composure, though it was clear the question had hit him harder than he let on. Kim could see his jaw tighten, the subtle shift in his posture, as if he was weighing something heavy, inside. Margot continued to study him with an intensity that felt almost unnerving. Her eyes, though small, seemed to pierce through him, searching for something hidden beneath the surface. I think you're mixing me up with someone, James said smoothly, his voice calm, but there was an underlying edge of tension that Kim could feel. Maybe, Margot muttered, but her gaze lingered on him, her memories unlocking something in the back of her mind. But those eyes. I remember those eyes. You don't forget eyes like that. Kim's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the shift in the room, the air growing thick and heavy. This wasn't just a simple case of mistaken identity. This was something deeper. But she couldn't let it show. Not here, not now. Stepping forward, Kim gently took her grandmother's hand, trying to calm the storm brewing in the room. "Grandma," she said softly, her voice full of reassurance, "everything's fine. James is new around here. You must be thinking of someone else." Margot's piercing stare softened a little, though it didn't completely disappear. She looked at Kim with a knowing smile, as if accepting the explanation, but Kim wasn't sure if she had fully convinced her. Margot's sharp mind hadn't missed a thing. "You're right, dear," the old woman muttered, finally breaking her intense gaze. "Age plays tricks on me sometimes. I'm getting too old to trust my own memory." James let out a barely audible sigh of relief, though his muscles remained tense, his body still alert. The last thing he wanted was to be recognized. Not now, not with everything at stake. But somehow, he managed to smile, to mask the fear that threatened to bubble to the surface. "It's all right," he said, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm just new here." Margot smiled again, her eyes softening. "He seems like a good man," she said to Kim, her voice warm and approving. "If he takes good care of you, he has my blessing." Kim's heart swelled at her grandmother's words, a wave of emotion washing over her. For a moment, it felt like everything was falling into place. Maybe this strange, chaotic plan of hers wasn't so bad after all. "He does," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. The words felt true, even though there was so much about James that she still didn't know. Dinner was served soon after, a feast that made Kim's stomach growl in anticipation. Her mother had outdone herself: roast chicken, rice with almonds, creamy potato salad, and a homemade apple pie that filled the room with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. It was more food than Kim usually saw in an entire month of working long shifts at the restaurant, and yet there was something oddly comforting about it. A homecoming of sorts. "James, help yourself, sweetheart," Kim's mother said warmly, pushing a dish toward him. James, ever the gentleman, thanked her with a soft smile before serving himself modestly. But Kim couldn't help but notice how carefully he moved, how refined his manners were, even in such an ordinary setting. His hands were precise as he scooped food onto his plate, his posture straight, his movements smooth and practiced. Kim found herself wondering about his past, about the life he had lived before all of this. Her mother noticed too, and after a moment, she raised an eyebrow, a glint of curiosity in her gaze. "You've got good manners, James," she said, setting her fork down. "What did you do before meeting my daughter?" James hesitated, his fork pausing mid-air. Kim's breath caught in her throat as she watched him, waiting for his answer. He was so calm, so composed, but there was something in the way he paused, something guarded in his expression. "I worked with people in different places," he said, his voice steady. "Nothing permanent, just helping small businesses grow. Now, I'm taking a break, starting fresh." Kim's mind raced. It sounded harmless enough, but something about it didn't sit right with her. He said it so casually, as if he had rehearsed it 1,000 times. But what did that really mean? What kind of consulting had he done? What was he hiding? Her mother seemed satisfied with the answer. "Consulting, huh?" she said, nodding. "Well, that's interesting." She picked up her fork again and continued eating, seemingly content with the explanation. But Kim wasn't quite as convinced. "So," her mom teased, looking between the two of them, "Chloe told me you two met recently. Was it love at first sight?" The question hung in the air, and Kim felt her heart skip a beat. She glanced at James, but he didn't seem thrown off by it. Instead, he turned toward her with a soft smile, one that made Kim's stomach flip. "Sort of," he said, his voice light and easy. It was an unexpected connection, but very real. Kim's breath caught in her throat. The way he looked at her, the warmth in his eyes, it felt real. She couldn't deny it. But this whole situation was still so strange, so completely unexpected. A marriage based on nothing but a moment of desperation. Yet, there was something about James. Something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it wasn't all a mistake. Her mother, blissfully unaware of the storm of thoughts running through Kim's mind, nodded approvingly. "What matters is she's happy," she said with a smile. "And if Grandma gave her blessing, who am I to disagree?" Dinner continued, the conversation flowing easily around the table. James spoke in carefully chosen words, never saying too much, but always saying just enough. His stories were charming, neutral enough to keep everyone entertained, but not revealing anything that might expose the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Still, Kim couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he was letting on. After dessert, James volunteered to wash the dishes, a small gesture that completely charmed Kim's mother. "You're a keeper," her mom said with a grin, clearly impressed. Kim smiled but couldn't help but notice how effortlessly James slid into this role, as if he had been doing it for years. There was something unsettling about how natural he seemed in every situation, as if he was always playing a part. As they cleared the table, Kim slipped away with her grandmother. "So, what did you really think of him?" she asked, sitting on the edge of her grandmother's bed. Margot smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "He's special," she said slowly, her voice quiet but firm. "I've always had a good feeling about people. But..." She paused, a slight frown forming on her face. "He's not telling the whole truth. That's obvious. He's more than what he says he is." Kim's stomach churned at her grandmother's words. "I know," she admitted quietly. "But, Grandma, he helped me when I was at my lowest, and I don't know how I would have made it through the last few days without him." Her grandmother squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes people's secrets don't define who they are. What matters is how they treat us." Kim nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. She kissed her grandmother's forehead before heading back to the living room. James was just finishing putting the dishes away. "You're pretty good at washing dishes," Kim remarked with a teasing smile. "I know how to do a few things," he said with a soft chuckle. "I was a Boy Scout." Kim laughed. "I think my mom really liked you." "And your grandma?" James asked, his smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Well, she didn't kick you out," Kim said with a smile. "So, I guess we're doing okay." James smiled back, but for a moment, there was something more serious in his eyes. "Now we just have, what? 90 days to go?" "Something like that," Kim replied. There was a strange weight to the words, like the clock was ticking on something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. James looked at her, his expression softening. "You know, if you ever want to stop all this, just say the word." Kim didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at him, trying to make sense of everything. It felt so complicated, so impossible. But in a strange way, it was working. "I know," she said softly. "But for now, it's working. In a weird way, it is." They sat in silence, the weight of the moment hanging between them. Kim couldn't help but think about James. There was so much she didn't know, so much he wasn't saying. But for now, she chose not to ask. Not yet. Kim had always been one to keep her emotions locked away. Even when everything inside her screamed for release, she'd learned to bury it deep, where no one could see. But lately, things had felt different. The silence between her and James had grown heavy, thicker than ever before, and she could barely breathe under its weight. Since the wedding, they'd both kept their distance, living under the same roof like strangers, like roommates who didn't know how to talk to each other anymore. But tonight, as she sat on the edge of the bed, something shifted inside her. A thought, small at first, began to take root. She could feel the tension in the air, the almost electric current between them whenever they shared a quiet moment. Her fingers nervously toyed with the edge of the blanket, tracing imaginary lines, but it wasn't just the quietness that had her on edge. It was him, James. The man who had become so much more than a stranger to her, someone who had unknowingly crept into her life, her thoughts, her heart. She could feel the memory of their kiss, almost, but it was only a dream. They hadn't kissed, not yet. But she could picture it so clearly. The way his lips would feel against hers, soft but with a desperate hunger for the truth, for what they were both too afraid to admit. She had imagined it so many times in the dark, that moment of crossing over into something real. But no. It had always been just out of reach. Just like everything else between them. Until now. Kim could no longer pretend. The truth was haunting her, replaying over and over, in fragments, in whispers, in broken pieces that didn't fit together. James's presence, his kindness, his sincerity, it was all too real. And that terrified her. She wanted to move on. She wanted to forget everything he had kept hidden, everything that had come crashing into her life like a storm. But the truth kept clawing at her, just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. So, Kim did what she knew best, she ran. She walked out of the house, leaving the quiet behind, trying to escape her racing thoughts. She found herself in a familiar place, the neighborhood bookstore she had visited countless times in her past. A sanctuary from the chaos of her mind, a place where the world felt smaller, more manageable. As she wandered between the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of old books, a sense of comfort washed over her. It was a distraction, a temporary refuge from the storm inside. But then, as if the universe couldn't let her rest, she overheard two women talking on the other side of the shelf. Their conversation was a knife, slicing through the silence. "Did you hear? He's back," one of them said. Kim froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to hear this, didn't want his name lingering in the air like that. "Yeah, I heard," the other woman replied, her voice low. "And now he shows up like nothing ever happened. That's just like the rich. They disappear when it suits them, and then come back when it's safe." Kim's stomach churned. She wanted to disappear into the shelves, but her feet were rooted to the floor. "But did you see the video?" the first woman continued. "He looked sincere, like he actually meant it. I don't know, there's something in his eyes, something real." The words echoed in Kim's mind, like a refrain she couldn't shake. "I haven't lost my conscience." That one sentence. It was too much. She couldn't breathe. She turned on her heel, walking quickly toward the door, trying to push it all out of her mind. But it followed her, every word, every question. And then her phone buzzed, pulling her back into the storm. It was a message. An unknown number. "You need to know what he did for you." Kim frowned, her hand trembling as she tapped the screen. Another message followed almost immediately, this time with an address and a time. No name, no explanation. Just an invitation, or perhaps a command. She stood there, staring at the phone, her mind racing. Should she go? Should she even consider this? But curiosity gnawed at her, and maybe, just maybe, she needed the answers she hadn't dared to ask. She needed to know. At the appointed time, Kim found herself standing outside a small, nondescript office building in downtown. She had no idea what she was doing, but something in her urged her forward. Her heart hammered in her chest as she took the stairs to the third floor, where she was greeted by a man in a suit. He looked like someone who belonged in this world, a world Kim had never quite understood. "Miss Jack," the man said, his voice steady. "I'm Thomas. I worked with James for many years. He asked me to give you something personally in case things didn't go as planned." Kim didn't trust her voice to speak, so she simply nodded, waiting for him to continue. "What kind of something?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but her voice betrayed her. "The truth," Thomas said, his eyes serious. "But in a way that only you can decide what to do with it." He handed her a flash drive, cold and solid in her palm. Then he pointed to the door beside him. "There's a computer in there. You can watch it alone. I'll wait outside." Kim's hands shook as she entered the room. The door clicked shut behind her, and she stood there for a moment, heart pounding in her ears. With trembling fingers, she plugged in the device and double-clicked on the file. A video began to play. James appeared on the screen. His face looked tense, worn, as if this was the last thing he wanted to do, but the only thing he could. He was wearing the same simple clothes she remembered, casual, unpretentious. The background behind him was plain white. It was almost too familiar. "Hi, Kim," he began, his voice soft but laced with an undeniable sincerity. "If you're watching this, it means I messed everything up again." Kim's breath caught in her throat. The words were already stabbing at her heart. He paused, ran a hand over his face like he was gathering himself. "I wanted to tell you everything from the beginning. I wanted it to be clean, honest," he continued, eyes flicking to the side as if he was searching for the right words. "But I came into your life at a time when disappearing was my only shot at staying free. And then you showed up, and somehow, you gave me peace." Kim could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want to, but she couldn't stop them. She had to keep watching. James took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "I agreed to that wedding because I thought it would be a quick act, just an excuse, an escape. But in you, I found something I didn't even know I was searching for. Truth. I needed that more than I realized." His gaze was steady now, meeting her eyes through the camera. "You were the first person in a long time who didn't want anything from me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No favors, no deals, no numbers. You just wanted to feed me and talk to me. And I fell in love with you before I even realized it." Kim felt her chest tighten. The words were raw, too raw. She wasn't prepared for this. "I left this video because I know I might never get another chance," James said. His voice wavered slightly, and Kim could feel every word, every confession, cutting through her. "I know I could lose everything, including you. But if someday you want to know everything, no masks, I'll be waiting. And if you don't, I'll understand." The screen went black, but the words lingered in the air like an echo. Kim sat there, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. The truth hung in the room like a heavy fog. When she finally emerged, Thomas handed her an envelope. "This is for you," he said, his voice almost sympathetic. "James arranged for the apartment to be yours, in case he disappears again. It's in his name, but the paperwork is ready to transfer." Kim shook her head. "I can't accept this." "He wanted you to have something of your own," Thomas insisted. "Something no one could take away." Kim's mind was spinning, her thoughts too jumbled to process. She took the envelope but didn't open it. She walked down the stairs in a daze, unsure of anything anymore. On her way home, she stopped at a park, sat on a bench, and took a deep breath. Her phone vibrated again. A video message. It was James again. This time, he was standing in front of a window, the city lights behind him casting a soft glow over his face. "One more thing," he said, his voice steady, but with a hint of something deeper, more vulnerable. "I wanted to show you something I've never shown anyone." The camera shook slightly as he turned it toward a wall full of photos, printed pictures, carefully pinned up. Many of them, Kim recognized. There she was, with James, laughing at her grandmother's house. Another, blurry, of her in the kitchen, caught off guard. A moment frozen in time. "I saved every second," James said, his voice almost a whisper. "Because even if it didn't last long, it was the best part of my life in a long time. And if I have to disappear again, I just want you to know it wasn't a performance. It wasn't a plan. It was love." Kim pressed the phone to her chest, the tears coming faster now, unstoppable. It was love. Messy, interrupted, unlikely. But it was real. The next morning, she woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. The doubts, the confusion, they were still there, but now she was ready to face them. She was ready to know the truth. For the first time since James left, Kim walked back to the place where it all began, the sidewalk where they met. The spot that had felt so ordinary, so insignificant back then. But now, it felt like a million different things. And there, taped to the wall, was a photo of them. Her and James, side by side, laughing, captured by someone who had been watching without them knowing. On the back of the photo, a note. "I still dream about that almost kiss." Kim smiled through her tears, the weight of everything beginning to lift. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe, just maybe, they still had a chance. The silence had stretched on for 2 whole weeks since James's last message, a silence that felt like an endless void. Kim hadn't realized how much she had been waiting for something, anything, from him, until she found herself listening to the echo of her own thoughts, fighting to keep the memories from flooding back. Her apartment, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a cold shell of what it had been. The absence of James was palpable in every corner, like a shadow that refused to leave. Even the smell of coffee in the mornings, which had once been a comforting start to her day, now tasted flat, empty. The mattress that once rested on the floor, where they had shared quiet moments, remained folded in the corner, a constant reminder that someone who had once been there was no longer part of her life. Kim tried to distract herself by throwing herself into work, doubling her shifts at the restaurant, scrubbing every inch of her apartment until it gleamed. She worked herself to exhaustion, hoping the physical fatigue would numb the emotional ache that had settled deep inside her. But when the evening came, when the world around her quieted down, that emptiness would return. She didn't know what hurt more, the fact that James wasn't there or that he hadn't returned to make things right. Then, one afternoon, as Kim was washing glasses at the restaurant, the manager came in with a look that instantly set her on edge. "Kim," she said, her voice laced with something unfamiliar. "There's someone waiting for you outside. She says her name is Laura Smith." The name hit Kim like a punch to the gut. Smith. The last name that was so closely tied to James. Her heart skipped a beat, and her hands froze in place, the glass she was holding almost slipping from her grasp. What was this about? Why was his sister here? With a quick nod, Kim wiped her hands on a towel, trying to shake the sudden tension in her chest. She walked to the back door, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. As soon as she stepped outside, her eyes landed on a woman standing by the curb. She was dressed in a professional, tailored suit, with brown hair neatly tied back into a bun, and a calm, confident air about her. But it was the eyes, those same eyes that James had, that froze Kim in place. "Are you Kim Jack?" the woman asked, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of something else, something Kim couldn't place. "Yes," Kim replied, her voice tight, her stomach twisting. "Who are you?" The woman didn't flinch. "I'm James's sister. Laura." The world seemed to spin for a second. Kim felt her breath catch in her throat. James's sister? She had never heard a single word about her. He'd kept his life so hidden, so tightly guarded. Kim tried to stay composed, her mind racing. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms, her voice guarded, unsure whether she wanted answers. Laura gave a small, almost knowing smile. "I'm here because my brother can't be. And because I thought you deserved to know." Kim's heart raced. "Know what?" Laura's eyes softened, her voice dropping a little as she spoke. "That he still thinks about you every day. That he doesn't regret meeting you. And that he's trying to respect your space, even though it's tearing him apart." Kim swallowed, the words sinking in. She had never imagined James would still think of her. The anger and hurt she felt at his disappearance seemed to shift, replaced by something else, something softer, but no less painful. He had time to tell me the truth before, Kim shot back, her arms still tightly crossed, her chest tight with emotion. He didn't. Now, after everything that's come out, he disappears. Just like that. Without a word. Laura's expression softened even further. He didn't disappear, Kim. He's trying to rebuild everything he lost. Not just the company, but his trust in himself, his self-worth. He thought that coming back now would be selfish, and that you deserve to decide for yourself. Kim felt a tightness in her chest. Part of her wanted to hear those words. Part of her wanted to believe in them, but another part, the part that had been hurt, still held on to the anger. She couldn't let it go so easily. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice quiet, the suspicion still hanging between them. "Because," Laura began, her gaze intense, "I saw who he became when you came into his life. And I saw who he turned back into when you left. I've never seen James so human, so broken at the same time. I thought you should know." Laura handed her an envelope, the weight of it seeming to pull at Kim's resolve. "He asked me to give you this, if you're open to it. It's an invitation for a foundation event tomorrow. He doesn't know I'm inviting you, but he'll be there. And maybe you two need to see each other again. Even if nothing is said." Kim stood there, the envelope heavy in her hands, not knowing what to do. She watched as Laura turned and walked away, the weight of the invitation pressing against her chest. Her mind was a storm of confusion. What would seeing him again do? Would it give her the closure she needed, or would it make things worse? That night, Kim sat at her table, staring at the envelope for hours. She picked it up, put it down, walked around her apartment, as if every step was part of some internal debate. She couldn't ignore the pull. She couldn't pretend she didn't still care. But she wasn't sure if seeing James would bring healing or just open up old wounds. The next evening, Kim arrived at the Smith Foundation Hall. The venue was elegant, understated, a place that felt both distant and too close. It was a world of people who talked about investments, charity, and social causes, and Kim tried her best to blend in. She wore a simple but lovely dress, making sure to keep a low profile. The guests around her were talking about James's return to the business world, and while many hailed him as a genius, others whispered about how reckless he had been. Everyone seemed to have their opinion about him, but Kim only half listened. Her mind wasn't focused on the rumors or the gossip. It was scanning the room, looking for him. And then she saw him. Across the room, talking to two businessmen. He was thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes, but he still had that commanding presence. That was James, unmistakably. Kim's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately looked away. But she couldn't stop herself from looking back, just for a second. She walked over to the appetizer table, pretending to study the cheeses on display, but her thoughts were a blur. Her heart was racing, and every part of her was screaming to leave, to walk out the door and forget all of this. But before she could move, she heard a voice behind her. "You came." She turned, slowly, and there he was. James. Standing in front of her, tense, waiting for some kind of reaction. "I wasn't sure I would," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Until I saw the invitation." "It was my sister, wasn't it?" James nodded, his eyes full of regret. "I didn't ask. I thought you needed space." "Then why are you here?" Kim asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but sharp with emotion. "Because this event matters for the company's image," James said, his voice low, almost apologetic. "But also because part of me still hopes to see you wherever I go." There was silence between them, thick and heavy. Kim couldn't speak at first. She didn't know what to say, how to say it. Finally, she exhaled deeply. "You could have told me before," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Not your name, not the money, but the truth. I know now it wasn't all a lie. But you let me walk away. You didn't try to come back. Trying would have meant pushing, James said quietly. And after everything that happened, I didn't want to step into something that still belonged to you. Kim looked at him, her chest tight. I would have listened, she said. I was angry. But it wasn't the end. I still don't know if it is. James's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked like the man she had known in a time that felt both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Maybe we just need more time, he said quietly. Maybe, Kim replied, her voice uncertain but not cold. A long silence passed, and then James hesitantly asked, Do you still have the ring? Kim looked down at her hand. She hadn't taken it off, though she had tried. Something in her just couldn't let go. Slowly, she raised her hand, showing the ring on her finger. I tried to take it off, she said softly. But something in me wouldn't let me. James smiled, a small, sad smile, but it was honest. Then I'll wait. However long it takes. Kim looked at him for a long time, her heart in turmoil. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say, 1,000 feelings she wanted to pour out, but none of them seemed enough to explain everything they had been through. Finally, she spoke. James, it's not just about what happened. It's about how we deal with everything from now on. I don't want any more lies, and I don't want to keep running. They stood there, surrounded by the soft sounds of the party, the quiet hum of conversations around them. There were no promises made, no declarations. Just two people, standing in the aftermath of their past, realizing that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like there was a path. Relationship taking shape, a quiet kind of understanding between them. It was strange how familiar it felt, yet so new. The weight of the past still hovered over them, but in moments like this, just the two of them, cooking together, it was easier to forget. Kim felt the warmth of the apartment, the clink of utensils, the steady rhythm of their laughter. She hadn't realized how much she missed this, just being together, no pretense, no past mistakes hanging over their heads. James, for once, wasn't trying to fix anything. He wasn't playing a role. He was just there, in her space, with her. You know, she said, stirring a pot of sauce, this is the first time I've seen you cook anything other than scrambled eggs. James smiled, a soft, self-deprecating grin. Well, they say you've got to start somewhere. Kim shook her head, laughing. I don't know if this counts as starting. It's definitely a disaster waiting to happen. Maybe, James said, his voice low, but it feels a little bit like we're finally starting something, doesn't it? The words hung between them, thick with meaning. Kim felt her heart skip a beat, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't. She wasn't ready. The walls she'd built around herself felt fragile, and she was terrified of letting them crumble too soon. They continued cooking, talking, the tension between them easing a little with every word. But Kim couldn't help but wonder, what did this all mean? Could they really just start over? Could James truly become the man he said he wanted to be? And could she trust him again? That night, as James left, Kim watched him disappear into the rainy night, his figure melting into the darkness, and she couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. Slowly, but they were. But would they be enough? The next few days felt like a blur, small, seemingly insignificant moments that had a strange weight to them. The texts. The messages before bed. The calls that lasted just a little longer than they used to. James was always there, always just a step away, a text away, a smile away. One afternoon, Kim was sitting in the park, her eyes scanning the horizon, her thoughts scattered like the autumn leaves around her. She had been thinking about James, as usual, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it without thinking. A message from him. I know you don't want to talk about the past, and maybe I don't either, but I need to ask you something." Her heart skipped. It was the first time he had ever said anything like this since they'd started seeing each other again. The weight of those words hit her all at once. She typed back, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed, "What is it?" A few seconds passed before his reply came. "When you look at me, do you see the man who left, or the one who's standing here now?" Kim stared at the screen for a long moment. She didn't know how to answer that. Part of her wanted to say she saw both, but another part of her just wanted to ignore it all and hold on to the present. For a moment, she hesitated before replying, "I see you, the one who's here now." She pressed send and sat back against the bench, the weight of her own words settling over her. She wasn't sure if it was the truth, or if it was what she wished to be true. But it was all she could offer, for now. Later that night, she found herself back in the familiar place, the sidewalk, the spot where they had first met, where everything had begun. James was waiting for her, looking like he'd been standing there for hours. The streetlights cast a soft glow over his face, making the exhaustion in his eyes seem more pronounced. But when he saw her, his face lit up, just a little. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "I always come when it matters," Kim replied, her voice quiet but steady. They stood there for a moment, neither of them knowing exactly what to say. The silence was comfortable, though, like it always had been when they were just two people trying to figure out what came next. Finally, James spoke again. "You know, I never expected us to get here. I thought I'd lost you for good." Kim looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in a while. He wasn't the man who had left her. He wasn't the man who had lied to her, or the man who had disappeared without a word. He was here now, and he was trying. Maybe that was all she could ask for. "I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we were, James," Kim said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm willing to try. Not for you, not for me, but for what we could be." James's eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked like the same man who had once made her laugh on quiet nights, the same man who had promised her the world but had lost it all. But now, he was different. And maybe that was enough. "I don't need promises," James said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "I just need the chance. A real chance, without all the weight of the past." Kim nodded, feeling the knot in her chest loosen just a little. "Then let's take it, one step at a time. No expectations. No rush. Just us. We'll see where it goes." James smiled then, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. It wasn't the smile of a man who had everything figured out, but the smile of someone who was finally letting go of the past, ready to walk forward. And for the first time in a long time, Kim believed in it. Believed in them. She didn't know how long it would take to rebuild what they had lost. Maybe it would never be the same, but maybe that was okay. They didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to be honest with each other. The days that followed were filled with small moments of progress, texts, walks, quiet dinners. James never pushed her, always giving her space, but also never letting her forget that he was there. He had his demons, she had hers, and together they were learning to face them. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sunset, James turned to Kim. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked, his voice tentative. Kim hesitated, her eyes still fixed on the fading light. "I think about it sometimes," she said. "But I can't get there if I'm always looking back." James reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Then let's not look back. Not anymore." And for the first time in a long time, Kim felt a glimmer of hope, small but bright. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to move forward, together. As the night settled in and the last traces of sunlight disappeared, they sat in silence, the soft hum of the city around them, and Kim felt a warmth in her chest, a warmth that had been missing for far too long. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in ages, she was okay with that. Because for the first time, she wasn't alone. One evening, as they stood side by side at the sink, the weight of the past seemed to slip away. The dishes piled up, but neither of them seemed to mind. It felt familiar, comfortable, almost like they had never been apart. Kim's hands were covered in suds, and James's shirt was soaked through. It was one of those moments that felt like it could belong in a movie, the kind where the two characters stand close, their hearts beating a little faster but not quite sure if they're ready to take the next step. "This feels like a movie scene," Kim said, her voice soft as she scrubbed a plate. James glanced at her, his smile playful, though there was a tenderness in his eyes. "Which one?" he asked, laughing. "The part where the two people almost kiss, but they're not quite ready yet." Her words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to still. It was as if time was holding its breath, waiting. James stopped what he was doing, setting the plate down on the counter. He turned to her, his gaze steady, and for the first time in a long while, Kim saw something different in him. No games. No walls. Just James. "I'm ready," he said, his voice low and genuine. Kim's heart skipped a beat. She stood frozen for a moment, feeling the rush of emotions inside her. This was it. No more pretending. No more fears. Her eyes met his, and without thinking, she closed the distance between them. "Then kiss me," she whispered. It was slow at first, as if neither one of them was in a hurry. His lips were gentle against hers, no urgency, no rush, just real. It wasn't a kiss born of expectations or obligations. It wasn't a kiss because it was the next step in some grand plan. It was simply a kiss that felt right. And when they pulled apart, her eyes remained closed, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Finally, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. James's forehead rested against hers, and he sighed, his breath warm against her skin. "You have no idea how many times I dreamed of this." "Me, too." That night, James didn't leave. And although they hadn't said a word about it, there was an unspoken understanding between them now. They had crossed a line, not into something forced or hurried, but into something real. Something that had been quietly building in the background of all their doubts, all their silences. The silence between them, however, was different now. It was not heavy with fear or regret, but light with possibility. It was the kind of silence that only happens when two people are truly in tune with each other, when everything feels right, even without saying a word. Kim felt it deep inside her, the kind of peace that had eluded her for so long. She fell asleep that night with the strange sense that she wasn't waiting anymore. For the first time in so long, she wasn't anticipating something. She was already living in the moment she had feared would never come. The next morning, the sunlight crept through the curtains, gently illuminating the room. Kim's eyes fluttered open, still feeling the warmth of the moment they had shared the night before. As she lay there, next to James, her mind went momentarily blank, and for a heartbeat, she forgot everything. The lies. The hurt. The silence. All that remained was peace. James was asleep beside her, one hand outstretched between them, as if, even in sleep, he wasn't ready to let her go. Kim studied his face, watching the way he looked in these quiet moments. He looked different somehow. More vulnerable. More like the man she had first met, the one who had stood on the sidewalk, looking at her with gratitude and sincerity. The man who had accepted a simple plate of food like it was the most valuable thing in the world. She leaned over and kissed his forehead gently, her lips brushing his skin in a soft, almost reverent gesture. James stirred, his eyes slowly opening as a sleepy smile spread across his face. "Now that's what I call a good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. Kim smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Did you sleep well?" "Like the world had stopped," he said, his words laced with a hint of sadness, as if he wished that moment could last forever. Kim lay back down beside him, her face inches from his. "Last night felt like a dream," she said softly, gazing into his eyes. Today still does. But it's real. Is it? He asked, his fingers lightly grazing her cheek, his touch as gentle as his words. It is, she whispered, the words settling between them like a quiet promise. And I want it to stay that way. A shadow crossed her face, and her smile faltered just slightly. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. James turned to face her, concern flickering in his eyes. Of what? That all of this is too good to last, she said, her voice trembling. That now, after everything we've been through, something's going to come along and ruin it all over again. I don't know if I could handle it. James reached for her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. We can't predict the future, he said, his voice soft but certain, but we can build a stronger present. Slowly. No rush, no lies. I just need you to keep being honest with me, always. Kim felt the weight of his words sink in. She rested her head on his shoulder, and for a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was full of meaning, of understanding. It was as if time had slowed down, allowing them to savor the moment, to breathe it in like a rare treasure. Suddenly, James spoke again, his voice playful. Let's play a little game, he said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. For those who only read the comments. Kim raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Type Coca-Cola in the comments, he said with a grin. Only the ones who've made it this far will understand. Kim chuckled, shaking her head. You're ridiculous. James laughed too, the sound easy and warm. But even in the midst of the joke, there was something deeper in his gaze. Something unspoken. Later that afternoon, James invited Kim to go out, but not to a fancy restaurant or public event. This time, he wanted to show her something different. Something that had been a part of his life long before the chaos, long before everything that had happened between them. Let's go for a drive, James suggested, his smile mysterious and a little playful. Kim climbed into the car, her curiosity piqued. They drove for miles, the city fading behind them as the road stretched out into the calm of the countryside. Trees lined the road, their leaves whispering in the wind. It felt peaceful, far removed from the noise of the world. After almost an hour, they arrived at an old country house. It was simple, rustic, but well kept. Kim stepped out of the car, taking in the peaceful surroundings. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and there was a small lake in the back of the house. A hammock hung on the porch, swaying gently in the breeze. Where are we? Kim asked, looking at James in surprise. This is where my dad used to bring me when I needed to clear my head, James explained. After he passed, I come here whenever things get too noisy. Kim walked toward the porch with him, taking in the quiet beauty of the place. It's beautiful, she said, her voice full of awe. It's real, James replied softly, his eyes distant for a moment as if lost in thought. Just like us. Inside the house, the walls were lined with old books and landscape paintings. There was a fireplace, and a worn leather couch sat in front of it. Kim wandered over to a picture frame on the mantel, her fingers tracing the glass. It was a photo of a teenage James, standing next to an older man who Kim recognized as his father. Your father? She asked quietly. Yes, James said, his voice laced with both pride and sadness. He taught me that money can buy almost everything, except character. I spent years trying to prove him wrong until I realized he was right all along. Kim turned to look at him, her heart aching a little for him. Would he approve of what you're trying to do now? James met her gaze, his expression softening. I hope so. I know he would have loved you. Kim smiled, touched by his words. And what about you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James stepped closer, his face inches from hers. I think I'm starting to, he said, his words simple but filled with meaning. Kim's heart skipped a beat. His honesty, his openness, it was both terrifying and beautiful. She didn't know how to respond, but somehow, she found herself smiling. "Starting?" she asked, teasing him gently. "That's a little scary." James smiled back, the fear and the excitement mixing in his eyes. "Most good things are," he said softly. They spent the rest of the afternoon on the porch, drinking coffee from an old pot that had belonged to James's father. Kim wrapped herself in a blanket as they sat together, watching the sky reflect off the lake, feeling the weight of everything between them shift, slowly but surely. "I needed this," Kim said, holding the cup of coffee close. "So did I," James replied. "Have you ever thought about leaving everything behind? Just disappearing?" "I have many times," Kim admitted. "But then I realized something." "What's that?" "Running away is different from starting over," she said, looking at him seriously. "Running away is leaving everything behind. Starting over is choosing where to stay." James turned to her, his gaze steady and full of meaning. "And you chose to stay." Kim smiled, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. "Wherever you are, that's where I'll be." The words hung in the air, soft but powerful, like a promise. It was a little scary, but it felt right. "Most good things are," James said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. As they drove back to the city, the silence between them felt different. It was no longer filled with doubt or uncertainty. It was comforting. Peaceful. And for the first time in a long while, Kim felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. A few days later, James appeared at the door of Kim's restaurant. This time, he had a different expression on his face, serious, but with a hint of nervousness. "Can I talk to you for 5 minutes?" he asked, his voice urgent but steady. Kim nodded, glancing at the manager before stepping outside to meet him on the sidewalk. "What's going on?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. James's face was serious now, and he seemed deep in thought. "I've been invited to give a talk about rebuilding reputations in the business world," he said, his voice holding a quiet intensity. "And I want you to be there with me." James stood there with his back to her, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow around him. He had arranged the rooftop to feel like a small oasis, soft string lights hung from the edges, casting a gentle glow, while candles flickered in little clusters on the floor. Petals from roses scattered across the ground, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. Kim's heart raced in her chest as she walked closer, drawn to the calm yet intense presence of the man she had grown to care for in ways she hadn't expected. The air around her seemed to hold its breath, like the world was pausing to see what would unfold between them next. The soft breeze ruffled her hair, but she didn't mind. She felt both nervous and incredibly at peace. "Too beautiful to be a coincidence," she murmured as she reached him, gazing out at the orange sky, the horizon set ablaze in vibrant hues. The evening was perfect, not just because of the view, but because it felt like the perfect moment for everything that had been slowly building between them to finally come to the surface. James turned around slowly at the sound of her voice, his expression soft, almost vulnerable. "I think it was meant to be this way," he said quietly. His voice held a deep sincerity, one that Kim had heard before, but tonight it felt different, heavier with meaning. She couldn't help but smile, though there was a fluttering anxiety in her chest. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" she asked, teasing yet with a softness that revealed how much she appreciated this gesture, how much she appreciated him. "I have," James confessed, stepping closer to her. "I wanted this moment to feel real. Because that's what we are. We're real, Kim. We've been through so much, and we've still ended up here." His words hung in the air, and Kim felt a wave of emotion surge through her. She wasn't sure if it was the setting, the intimacy of the moment, or the undeniable truth in James's words, but something deep inside her shifted. It was a feeling of understanding, of coming to terms with everything that had happened between them, the good, the bad, the ugly, and realizing it had brought them to this point. This moment. She looked at him, the intensity in her eyes matching the quiet strength in his. James, I. She paused, the words fighting to come out. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm not scared of it anymore. I'm not scared of us anymore. James reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. I'm not scared either, he said with a small smile. Because we've already faced the worst of it, haven't we? She nodded slowly, the weight of the past lifting just a little more. Yes, we have. They stood in silence for a moment, simply soaking in the beauty of the sunset and the closeness of each other. But Kim's mind was racing, her heart racing, because she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. Everything had led up to this, all the moments, the confusion, the fear, the doubt. It was all part of the story, but now she could feel the pages turning towards something else. Something new. Something real. James spoke again, breaking the silence that had settled between them. You know, when I lost everything, I thought I had nothing left to give. But then I found out what really matters. It's not the money, the fame, or even the mistakes I made. It's the people we choose to stand by us when everything else falls apart. It's you, Kim. You were the one who saw me when I was nothing. You're the reason I'm standing here now. His words were soft but powerful, and they hit her in a way she didn't expect. She squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge until now. James. I don't know what to say. She laughed softly, a nervous yet genuine laugh. I never thought I'd be standing here with you, hearing this from you. But here we are. He stepped closer, his presence grounding her, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside didn't exist. There were no worries, no distractions, just the two of them and everything they had been through. You don't have to say anything, he said gently. You just have to be here, with me, right now. That's all I've ever needed. A lump formed in Kim's throat, but she didn't look away. She didn't want to. She needed to hear him, to feel him, to be a part of this story they were writing together. She took a deep breath, then smiled, a smile that was equal parts sadness and joy. Then I'll be here, she whispered, barely audible. I'm here, James. He smiled, that same calm, steady smile that she had come to love. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. His hands were shaking slightly, but Kim didn't miss the significance of the gesture. I need to ask you something, he said, his voice suddenly serious. I've been thinking about it for a while. I've thought about how to move forward, how to build something real, something we can both be proud of. And I want to share that with you. Her heart skipped a beat as she took the envelope from him, her fingers brushing against his as she did. What's this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Open it when you're alone, he said, his eyes locking with hers. And then, we'll see what happens next. Hours later, back at her apartment, Kim sat at the kitchen table, her heart racing in anticipation. The envelope was still in her hands. Her thoughts swirled around in her mind, but she could only focus on one thing: what was James asking her? What did this letter mean? With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. It was handwritten, the words messy yet full of emotion, as if James had poured his soul into every single one. Kim, the letter began. If you're reading this, it's because I couldn't say it out loud. I still lose my breath when you look at me like that, the way you do. The way you make me feel like I'm the only person in the world. When I sat on that sidewalk, I thought I had lost everything. But the universe showed me that I hadn't lost what really mattered. I just hadn't found it yet. And then you came along. The letter went on to explain everything Kim had already felt, the sense of rediscovery, of being seen in ways she never thought possible. It spoke of love, of vulnerability, and of a future neither of them could have imagined when their story first began. "I changed," James had written. "I grew. And I fell in love. Not with what you did for me, but with who you are. And now, I want to ask you something. Not to run away with me, but to stay, to build something real together. Not a perfect story, but a real one. A story we create with love, with truth, and with you in it. If you say yes, meet me on the hotel rooftop tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'll be there. Always." Kim put the letter down slowly, her mind racing. She had never felt so sure of something in her life, yet the uncertainty still lingered, making her question everything once more. What would she say? What would happen next? Could she truly trust herself to take this leap? But in that moment, as the sun set outside her window and the stars began to appear, Kim knew one thing for sure: this was the beginning of something new. Something real. And she wasn't ready to let go of that feeling just yet. The next day, she stood at the foot of the hotel stairs, her heart pounding, her thoughts clear. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to find out. At 6 p.m., just like James had asked, she arrived at the rooftop. The space was filled with soft lights, candles flickering in the evening breeze, and the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. She couldn't help but smile as she saw James standing there, waiting for her. Everything had led to this moment. And Kim felt that, no matter what came next, she was ready to step into the future with him by her side. Together. James stood there, his back straight and his gaze focused on the horizon, where the sun was slowly dipping below the skyline. The soft light from the setting sun bathed everything in a warm glow, making everything feel like it was suspended in time, perfect, untouched. He was wearing a light-colored suit, crisp and sharp, with no tie, simple but undeniably elegant. There was something about the way he carried himself that made everything feel just right. Kim arrived at the rooftop, her heart pounding in her chest. When she saw him, her breath caught for a moment. The way the soft light outlined him, how still he stood, made him look almost like a figure from a dream. She hadn't expected this moment to feel so intense. So real. "You came," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and joy, as if he had been holding his breath, waiting for her to step into this moment with him. "Of course, I did," Kim replied, her voice steady, though she couldn't hide the deep feeling stirring inside her. James reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, velvet box. He opened it slowly, the motion deliberate, as if he was savoring every second. Inside the box was a ring, simple yet beautiful, just like the promise he was about to make. "I'm not here to repeat promises," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm here to make just one. That everything that comes next will be better than everything that came before. Because now it's with you. For you. Because of you." Kim's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She just held out her hand, silently urging him to place the ring on her finger. There was something about this moment, something that felt like it had been coming for a long time, even if neither of them had known it at the time. He placed the ring gently on her finger, his touch soft, tender. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the perfection of the moment. "That's a finally," Kim whispered back, a smile breaking through the tears. The weight of everything they had been through together, the struggles, the pain, the uncertainty, it all seemed to melt away in that instant. They embraced, and in that quiet, glowing moment, under the expanse of the evening sky, surrounded by the soft hum of the world going on around them, a new chapter began. One they had written together, step by step, through every difficult choice, every painful loss, and every beautiful victory. 3 months later, they stood together in Margot's backyard, the scene a far cry from the extravagant weddings that had once been a distant dream for Kim. It wasn't fancy, but it was meaningful. It was real. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. Kim stood at the altar, wearing a simple light dress, the delicate lace swirling around her as she moved. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and there was an undeniable peace in her expression, the kind that only comes when you know you're exactly where you're meant to be. James stood waiting for her, his eyes locked on her, full of emotion, full of love. He had changed so much since they first met, not just in the way he looked, but in the way he carried himself. The person who once lived under the weight of fame and fortune was gone, replaced by someone more real, more vulnerable, someone who could face the world without fear, because he knew that he didn't have to face it alone anymore. When it was time to speak their vows, James's voice rang clear, though it trembled with raw emotion. "I've been a millionaire, a beggar, accused, and cleared. But none of that defines me," he began, looking straight at Kim. "You taught me that love isn't a plan. It's a daily choice. And I choose you. Today, tomorrow, even if everything falls apart again." Kim's breath caught, and she felt the tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She tried to hold them back, but they came anyway, soft and unstoppable. "I spent years thinking I needed someone to save me," she said, her voice a little shaky but filled with truth, "and then you showed up. Not as a hero, but as a human being. And because of that, I choose to walk beside you, to face the chaos, and also the peace." The crowd was silent for a moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Then, as if on cue, the cheers erupted, louder than anyone else's. Friends, family, even old co-workers from the restaurant, clapping, laughing, wiping away their own tears. It was a beautiful chaos, full of joy and love. After the ceremony, as the reception began, Kim's grandmother called her and James over. "Now I can rest in peace," she said, her voice weak but filled with contentment. "I saw my girl get married, and to a good man." She smiled, her hands frail but her heart strong. "You've got many years ahead, Grandma," Kim said, kissing her grandmother's forehead gently. "It doesn't matter how much time I have," her grandmother replied, "my heart is at peace." James took Kim's hand, his grip steady and warm. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did," he said softly. "I recognized your eyes, and eyes don't lie." As the night wore on, the last dance of the evening began. Kim and James stood in the middle of the garden, barefoot, spinning slowly under the soft glow of the hanging lights. The music played softly around them, but it felt like the world had quieted, just for them. "You know what I love most about you?" Kim asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her face soft with a gentle smile. "My charm?" James teased, his grin playful, but there was something more serious in his eyes. "Your persistence," Kim replied. "Your persistence in staying, in trying, in loving me your way, even when it seemed impossible." James's smile softened, and he reached out, gently cupping her cheek. "I only managed it because you saw me before anyone else did." Kim stopped dancing, her eyes locking onto his. She looked at him with an intensity that made her heart race, something deep in her shifting. "Because you were always visible to me," she whispered. The words hung between them, so simple but so profound. James leaned in, his lips brushing hers softly, and in that moment, the world seemed to disappear. The noise, the pressure, the past, all of it faded away. There, in that quiet garden, under the soft glow of the lights, they understood. It wasn't their past that defined them. It was what they had built from it. Together. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, not needing to say anything more. In each other's arms, they had everything they needed. No more doubts, no more questions, just the certainty that they were where they were meant to be. And as the last song played, and the last of their guests said their goodbyes, Kim and James stepped into their future. Not as two broken people trying to find their way, but as two souls who had found each other, built a life together, and learned to love in a way neither of them had ever expected. Together, they were ready for whatever came next. Because no matter what the world threw their way, they knew one thing for sure, they had each other. And that was enough. Kim and James's story was far from over. It had only just begun. Thank you for joining us on Kim and James's journey. We hope their story touched your heart and left you feeling inspired. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of their story? How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Drop your thoughts and comments below, we always love hearing your feedback. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated on all our emotional and inspiring stories. Your support means the world to us, and we've got plenty more stories coming your way. Thanks for being a part of this journey with us.